I do count myself lucky growing up in the time of the internet, reading specifically in the time of the internet, because I never had issues finding more books. Finding good books has always been a tricky part, but finding a list of books that people recommended or anything like that has always been easy. When I was younger, what I do is search up, top 10 fantasy books, top 10 sci-fi books. It really helped me find new things that other people enjoyed, new things that I wasn't familiar with, because growing up, I definitely had a bit of a default, book list that we came with my family. We were the Lord of the Rings, Chronicles of Narnia family, the kind of just things that you like because you've inherited it from your parents. But searching up these lists has helped me find things like Gene Wolfe, Book of the New Sun, Brandon Sanderson, Mistborn is one thing, Dune, Game of Thrones, because even though these things were definitely getting big, or in the case of Dune, already big, they were new to me, and it was new and interesting, and I was constantly on the lookout for new stuff, new books, new stories to read. And one of them I came across is actually a strange story. How I ended up finding it is I was a big fan of Warcraft 3, the video game Warcraft 3 by Blizzard. And at this time, I followed the pro scene a good amount, and there was a specific player named Grubby who played Orc, who's a fantastic player, really, really fun to watch. And he listed among his favorite books a little series called Foundation. And I was immediately intrigued because I had never heard of this before. And so I clicked on it, pulled it up on Wikipedia. Turns out it was a very well-known story, bestseller, millions of copies sold, which, that seems to happen here and there and more frequently as I get older. I went to my local library, and turns out they had it, and I started reading it, and I absolutely loved it. And I've been thinking about it more and more recently, in particular because I've been seeing a number of clips from the TV show. I understand Apple TV has released a new show that seems to be fairly well received from what I hear. I could be wrong. So I would say, if you don't mind, please down in the comments, let me know. If you guys have watched the show, do you recommend it? Do you like it? Do you dislike it? Just let me know what your thoughts are. And I've been thinking about it more and more recently, and so I wanted to reread it because I don't remember much of the story. There's a lot that I don't recall. I don't remember why I liked it. I don't remember if it was good. And there's always this danger going back to stories that you really liked as a kid, because it could be awful. It could be absolutely terrible. Everything that you remember enjoying could have actually been the dumbest thing possible. And you're looking back at this now as an adult, and you're like, not only how could I have ever liked this, but at the same point now, the problem is all these fond memories you had of it as a kid are now completely gone. Like, it's just completely ruined for you from there. But on the other hand, there's the possibility that it's better than you remember it. And this is something that seems to have happened to me because I've reread recently the first book of the Foundation series, and I'm going to work through all of it because I'm looking forward to watching the show and kind of taking a look at it from there. But I've really enjoyed it. I've absolutely loved it. And I really wanted to kind of just talk about, what makes the story work, and talk about the story and kind of go into detail. And for this, I will say this will have a number of spoilers. So if you are not familiar with the story, just heads up, either go read it or be aware as we move forward. So let's take a deep dive on Isaac Asimov's Foundation series. So when I say the word sci-fi, the premier sci-fi series, there's going to be a number of images that pops in people's head, your head, or anything like that. And for me, one of the main things that used to pop in my head when thinking of sci-fi was Star Wars. Star Wars was the defining sci-fi series for me. And what I really pulled from was like, okay, there's going to be guns, there's going to be explosions, there's going to be space, basically everything that we knew now, a World War II movie, if you will. We're going to take that, but put it in space. We're going to have wizards. We're going to have, the Merlin characters. We're going to have the chosen swords. It's going to be Arthurian with the weapons, everything like that. That is my image. But going back, especially as I've read a little bit more, not a huge amount, but a little bit more of the old classic sci-fi stories, they focus generally less on what we seem to think as sci-fi, with all the mechs, the Gundams and stuff like that. It's more take one idea, one aspect, one thought, and let's really blow this up and let's play this out in a futuristic setting. At least for Isaac Asimov, what his idea is about this concept that he created called psychohistory, where it's let's take all of the wealth of knowledge that we know about humanity, economics, history, psychology, sociology, cultural, religion, archaeology, art, literature, everything, and start to categorize it into a beginning of understanding. So it's like these things preceded this thing, this event, this preceded war, this preceded famine. And as you start to chart that going forward, eventually you may be able to predict things that happen. You may not be very accurate from there, but you can start to predict things. And this is what his idea is, this concept, this kernel concept that he's trying to build off of it. And so what he does is he takes this idea and introduces it with his character, Harry Seldon. Harry Seldon is a loyal citizen of the forever reigning, 12,000 year reign of the Galactic Empire. And he's using this theory of psychohistory, and the sci-fi part really comes into this. He has, we learn, about 100,000 people working either with his team, directly on his team, or supporting his team. 100,000 people working towards this idea of psychohistory. And also the other aspect is we have, 12,000 years of the Galactic Empire behind us that we can use as this benchmark for psychohistory. But presumably we have thousands of years prior versus now. So this is where it kind of fills in this gap, hey, if this is such a good idea, why haven't we done this now? And this kind of explains that. So we have this idea going forward that we can now potentially predict the future. And where we're introduced to this, the other thing that's interesting is Harry Seldon is, for all intents and purposes, the main character of this first story, but the story is not told from his perspective. It's actually told from a different character's perspective. We meet this, this young mathematician named Gal Dornick, who eventually comes, he's excited, he's ecstatic to come to Trantor, the capital city, the capital planet, if you want to call it that, for the Galactic Empire, and work under the famed, mathematician and psychologist Harry Seldon. But as he arrives and he quickly realizes that they're kind of infamous. There's this, tense relationship going on because the Galactic Empire is trying to figure out if Harry Seldon is treasonous by means of predicting the fall, of talking about the Empire actually falling. He might go about accidentally causing or purposefully causing. They're trying to figure out if he's a malicious actor, if there's something going on. And so there's this tense, they get arrested and they're getting interrogated by the secret police. And we're starting to get a feel for, the power of this Galactic Empire and how, behind the courts and the legal systems and, appeals and everything like that, it's really just up to, Chairman Chen, who's the leader right now, the man in charge. It's really just up to him and his whims for what's going on. And there's this tense court battle where Harry Seldon reveals that the Galactic Empire will fall. There's nothing that they can do to stop it. But what they can do is to help prevent this 30,000 years of barbarism that he's predicted using his field of, psychohistory, of everything that they've chronicled together. There's going to be 30,000 years of just other, famine, genocide, death, everything like that's going to come into play. And there's nothing they can do to stop it. But there is the possibility that they can limit it to only 1,000 years if they take these steps. And so they're asking him, what steps are these? And he's like, well, we need to take all of the wealth of human knowledge and encode it in this Encyclopedia Galactica, this thing that him and his group, his 100,000, people are working on it. And they, they're going back and forth and they hear this. And then the chairman basically goes, very well, we'll allow it. We decided that you're not outwardly treasonous, so we'll allow it. However, you must leave. You have to go. And you have to go to this remote planet that we've selected called Terminus. This place where there's no natural resources. It's very, very, very far away. And you can't, go away, be gone from there. And they're getting ready to leave. And Gal, Dornick, the young mathematician, is like, this is a disaster. What are we going to do? And Harry Seldon's, relax. We've got this. We actually predicted this was going to happen based on psychohistory, and we've been preparing to leave for 2 years. We've actually been prepping for this all along. And it's just this mind-blowing moment where you're just like, holy cow, this guy's legit. Because, if you can predict this, you should actually be able to predict the basics. Otherwise, it's not much of a prediction system. It's like the people who make fun of people who can predict events as they happen. It's like he is not one of those. And this is what starts the story off, because now we're given this promise of something is going to happen. Something bad is going to happen. There's this looming promise of the fall, the fall of the Roman Empire, the fall of, whatever empire you want to take your pick of. There's this promise, there's a story. So we can begin, we as the audience, we can see this story that's going to play out to us. And so now we've been given this, but which sounds disastrous because who wants to sign up to read that? But then at the same time, we've been given this promise of we have this very, very dynamic character, a really strong character who knows what's going on. And this promise of if we follow this character of Harry Seldon, the good guys are going to win. It's going to be okay. So it's a dual promise of this disaster, but also this great character who can lead us forward. And this is what is interesting because, Asimov is not this, he's not a bad writer by any means. I think he's a great writer, but he's not known for, changing the language that, Shakespeare or anybody else did. He's known for telling these sci-fi stories. But the other funny part about this is that it turns out there's a number of sci-fi concepts, but there's a lot of the technology aspect that's completely devoid. And that's something that the story does, which is interesting because it's a series of short stories that make up this first book. And it's this kind of episodes, if you will, which is a really interesting way to tell it because it leaves so much out to where it could almost say that the world is really shallow. But what he does is he's giving you these little bitty pieces, these little bitty, understanding of how this could work. But he's not really explaining it, which is good. It makes sense why, because one, he doesn't necessarily know. Maybe he didn't go through all the time to create this whole wealth of technology that this other land, this other world, 12,000 years, 15,000 years in the future is going to, play out before him. But at the same point, it wouldn't also be explained because it's obvious. How many times do people go around in day to day and explain how the light bulb works, explain how their iPod works? They don't really think about it. It just works and you use it and you move on with your life. So there's this interesting world building aspect of it where he's really not showing a whole lot. But what he is showing in great detail, primarily about the psychohistory aspect, lets us to imagine this wealth of technology. Because, what he does, to give you a specific example, he's talking about how Trantor, the capital planet and city of the Galactic Empire, is basically the planet is almost just one city. And it's got 40 billion people in here that are all devoted around running the planet. So what we've taken for granted, different countries and big countries and small countries on Earth, with this, where you have individual companies that are thousands of people, maybe 10,000 people, something astronomical like that. Now we're just so beyond that, where now there's planets that are all united against each other, or united with each other against other solar systems or anything like that. You have whole planets, 100,000 people that are all devoting their lives for single purposes. Just the numbers are staggering, which give it this really realistic, because it makes sense that people would, follow in this, stratification that we find familiar, but just the scale is beyond anything we can imagine. And that's what really gives us this futuristic sci-fi, along with space travel and everything like there. And so this is how we're introduced to the world of Foundation. And another thing that I really like how Asimov sets the scene is a lot of time, it's funny the amount of just talking the stories have, where it's just two people in a room talking, or sometimes it's three people in a room talking. It's nothing really beyond that, because you would expect there to be like crazy ship battles or crazy bits of technology where people are creating all this Mission Impossible. Imagine Mission Impossible with sci-fi, graphics, or Rick and Morty. They really push the technology beyond it. But this is fairly limited. It really kind of seems to follow a lot of the similar rules, but just with a few things different. The psychohistory aspect with space travel with these different planets, but there's still a lot of the familiarity that we see in this from here. And so what we then jump to the second chapter, the next section of the story following the Encyclopedias, it follows the first crisis facing Terminus. The Foundation have left and they're working on this encyclopedia. The Encyclopedia Foundation is working on this, and everything is starting to fall apart. They're on the fringes because they've been banished to this, Terminus, this planet at the edge of the galaxy, at the edge of the civilized world. Everything's starting to fall apart around them, and they have these rebel, planets, solar systems, or not solar systems, but series of planets all around them that are starting to rebel or start to form treaties, basically to say, thank you, Empire, for your protection, but we no longer need it. Go away. And we won't attack you if you don't attack us. And they start making deals. And what this does is this leaves Foundation, on Terminus in a precarious situation, because a lot of these places are looking at them saying, listen, the Empire used to guarantee your safety, but now we really would rather have another military base. You guys don't have a lot of resources, so you can't fight back. You have no army, you have no resource. And so now this is what the leadership at Foundation is trying to figure out. They're trying to negotiate. And this is the other thing that I love about good stories will oftentimes have this, is they have really good problems. Good problems meaning this is something that it seems legit, it fits within the world, and it's not easily solved. Because if you have really complicated problems, you have to have really smart characters that solve them. Because otherwise we, the audience, would be like, why don't they just, just don't go outside? It's in the horror movies, a lot of them will have it where it's like, oh no, we're trapped by this guy who grabs people when they go outside. It's like, just don't go outside, problem solved, moving on. This, like, just don't go out when it's dark, just don't open the door, close your eyes, watch TV, put headphones on, just don't pay attention, and then nothing will happen and you'll be fine. But for Foundation now, they're getting surrounded by these, parasitic, invading other countries that are getting ready to invade, and they have two groups. I talked about there's these two characters talking. They represent different philosophies, A and B. And on one side, you have the encyclopedias who are like, listen, our job is to make the encyclopedias. We're not doing anything else. And on the other end, we have the first mayor, Salvor Hardin is the character's name. And he's like, listen, guys, we are going to be invaded if we don't do something soon. And on the other end, the encyclopedists are like, no, we're not supposed to get involved in politics or local stuff. We're not going to bother with that. We're just going to focus on the encyclopedia. And this argument's going back and forth and back and forth. And in the background, what we have is the local politics, Salvor Hardin's growing more and more stressed because, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? The encyclopedists are like, listen, this is the future of the world, the future of the galaxy is here. We need to focus on our work. We do not need to get caught up in it. We'll tell them we're not really going to be involved in local politics. We're not going to, go for this allegiance or that, everything from here. And it's building this tension, between these two groups, A and B, and they're arguing and fighting back and forth. And they have an emissary from the Empire, and these neighboring kingdom, particularly one of the Anacreons, who have this, wealth of planets and a lot more military power, but they don't quite have the same technological ability. That's the one thing Foundation has. They have this technological ability that is easily able to outpace everybody else. Everything else with the fall of the Empire, they have this technology that's so far advanced that they don't know how they got there. So to the point where we've and you can see this now, we're kind of there in some aspects where, an iPhone or an Android phone, a modern day smartphone without charging is just a brick. It's just a glorified paperweight. And trying to recreate that would probably take an extra, we could do it now because we have a lot of knowledge, but imagine if that knowledge was lost, if we fell apart into years, 100 years of anarchy, it would all be lost, and we go back to, the coal era, to steam engines and stuff like that. And it would really change. We wouldn't be able to do nuclear power, because that's the funny thing, because there's no computers in this world, because I don't think they were really out in the 1940s and 50s when Asimov was writing this. It was a lot about nuclear. So a lot of the stuff and the technology in this world is nuclear based. It's just really small. So it's like, that makes sense. Like, you can have a nuclear reactor in your pocket that then powers all this various engines and everything from here. So bring us now back to Foundation. We have this issue with this neighboring kingdoms, Anacreon, that is getting ready to destroy them, and they're trying to figure out. And Salvor Hardin is constantly, being goaded on to just take power because these people are not doing anything. They're going to get demolished. And he's getting ready to go this, and then right as they're trying to figure out what to do, Harry Seldon appears with a message. He goes, basically, it's been 50 years since the founding of Foundation, and I understand that you guys have been working on this encyclopedia, and that's all great, but it's all been a large farce. It's all been completely useless. I did all of this just to get everybody, the Foundation, the scientists, the wealth of knowledge away from the Empire, so that we can eventually form the second Empire after 1,000 years. We just need to bear it out. You guys need to overcome these challenges. And that's the interesting thing about psychohistory, is because he can't tell them too many specifics for what may happen, because if that's the case, then that may tip his other prediction models, which will then make his future predictions even more wrong, or even more incorrect. So he's trying to give them just enough guidance saying that you need to solve this problem, but not enough to where it changes the future of everything and ruins it going forward. And that's this balance that he's trying to do. And so what happens is Salvor Hardin takes power, because evidently the encyclopedia is just bunk. It's not really needed or necessary at that point. And so he begins to take power, and he really starts to take this proactive, power politics decisions that he has in front of him to try and figure out what to do, because he's got all these kingdoms surrounding him that are ready to, attack and munch on him and to basically just take over from here. And so what he ends up doing is he quickly takes over, and he starts making this, playing all these different kingdoms off of each other. Because he basically, he's writing saying, hey, we'll help you neighboring kingdom A with this if you help keep neighboring kingdom B from invading us, and same with neighboring kingdom C. And A, B, and C all hate and mistrust each other. So it kind of restores this power balance, because, they really want to take over this planet, because that's what you do. You just conquer. But then this power balance, and it's just like this brilliant stroke, and it's what makes the story so dynamic. Again, even though it's largely talking, like, it doesn't really go in depth about the battles, the fights, the blaster, the Star Wars aspect of sci-fi that we really appreciate and really look forward to. And what we get is kind of this story that plays out almost like a subtle behind the scenes detective story. And we're almost getting, the White House versus the Blue House in another kingdom, where they're talking back and forth, trying to figure out what to do and how to navigate everything going forward. And it makes this really interesting, very, very subtle world that Asimov is creating. And I think that's what's made it stand out and last so long, is because it's really enticing. It's really fun. It's really enjoyable to listen to. And the other thing that I love is in the future stories that you have, they'll look back and reference, Salvor Hardin as this great person. They'll quote him, and they'll do all this stuff to, make it feel like this is like a George Washington figure in this world. And it's all these little conversational ticks that make it feel real, make it feel foreign. That's one thing I think Firefly did really well, where they're really trying to create, swearing, this different, swear words, because it's really hard to create swear words because they don't sound legit. They sound forced and unnatural. But if you can, then you can get a really cool foreign sounding world from there, because everybody knows, there's certain ticks that people are looking for when they're listening to dialogue. They're looking for idioms, for sayings, for swear words, for this, that, and the other. And a lot of places they'll strip all that bare and not include it. And that's one thing that Asimov, for his dialogue and his language, it works really good. They won't say by Jove, by George. They'll say by Selden, Harry Selden, the founder of this whole world, the savior of humanity that will bring about, the second galactic empire and restore peace, everything like that. And same with Salvor Hardin, this, legendary character, especially as we get on in the further chapters, as it gets farther away, because again, it jumps forward 30 years. Salvor Hardin is this legendary George Washington figure who saved Foundation, and now they're quoting him and they're trying to get guidance from him and figuring out what to do, and it makes the world feel real, which again, when you make one aspect of a story feel real, that infects everything else. So if you make the dialogue sound real, then the problems seem more real, the characters seem more real, which means the story feels real, which means you're invested in it, because if everything about the story is real, that means the consequences are real, which means you want to see it to the end to figure out what's going to happen next. And that's what I think. Again, I'm probably going to read through all of the Foundation trilogy and possibly the other books. I'm really enjoying them so far. And I would advise you guys, if you haven't, read through it. The sections I covered here is kind of the first and second chapters, and everything else, it continues to build off of this, because they keep finding new problems and new ways to try and solve these problems. And these are really, really difficult problems that they're trying to solve. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. Please do comment down below whether the show is worthwhile watching, because if it's not, please stop me, because I'm probably going to end up watching it, and kind of what you liked about Foundation. What did you like about this old school sci-fi from there? So I really appreciate you guys listening at this point. Please do like and subscribe. It very much helps the videos out, and I really appreciate it. And this is Fiction Applied, and I'm Jeff Cassidy, and I'll see you in the next one.